Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on this Tuesday afternoon edition of the show. We're fresh off Oregon football practice. Some interviews. We spoke with four players, I should say, before this interview for this podcast. Josh Connolly Jr. We also spoke with Tez Johnson, Jalil Florence, and Taki Tiamani. We also spoke Monday night with Oregon head coach Dan Lanning, so we've gleaned a little bit more of information about that win at Tech Saturday night in West Texas, and also the fallout from that, the penalty issues, the self-inflicted wounds, how they're addressing that. Also a look ahead to Hawaii. And we were at practice as well. And let's start here with some injury news. Dan's not talking injuries, but we're able to at least go to practice and see who isn't available when we're there and who is. And there's some new names that have moved up, I guess, the order of operation to get fully back.
Yeah, the big one was Nishad Strother, who we hadn't seen since, I wrote down in my notes, August 22nd was the last time he had logged to practice or we'd seen him. I believe last week on Wednesday, you guys can correct me if I have my dates wrong, we might have seen him exiting practice, at least in pads. I think that's right. But Strother was at today's practice. He was in trainers, didn't really log any work when we watched. But again, we're watching not enough to really get a feel for what he's done during the day. But that's like a positive step for his possible return. I wouldn't anticipate he's available this weekend. And I don't even know when he comes back, if he's going to be a starter. I think if before the season, I had him over Harper in my projections. That was kind of guesswork. It was pretty kind of a toss-up. This far into the season, do you want to make that move, especially if, let's say, he's available for Colorado or Stanford? Do you wait till after the bye week? I'm not sure. Do you ever replace Harper? I mean, maybe you just feel better about him than I think some people do externally. That was the big one. And then the one that's just becoming a little bit more concerning, or maybe just less clarity about when there is a return, is Justin Jacobs, who was not at practice on Tuesday, I should say. Has not played this season, did make the trip along with Nishad to Texas Tech. And Jacobs had been practicing in trainers, at least, I think I wrote down here, since the 23rd of August. So that's a bit of a strange one. And certainly if you felt like he was getting closer, today probably doesn't make you feel much better. The only other absences are guys we've been missing for a minute here. True freshman, Lipe Malala, Tavita Pame, Andrew Boyle, Matt Rigney, I guess. I know we should mention one of the punters was not there. And then a new name, probably is never going to be a player who impacts much, but Jurion Dickey's older brother, Jawan Dickey, who's a defensive lineman, was there, was in red non-contact, didn't have a jersey number. Again, don't expect this is a name you're going to hear on Saturdays, at least certainly not this season, probably. But kind of cool that the brothers get to play on the same college football team, at least, I guess.
Yeah, I don't. There's nothing else to add here. These were all the injury guy. This is what we saw at practice.
Okay.
Moving forward, let's talk the penalties, because that was probably one of the bigger storylines of that game, beyond the comeback win and the plays that were made to make it happen. But the self-inflicted stuff, it was on both sides of the football. 14 total penalties by Oregon. I forget the exact total, but it was like 120 something yards in that game that they committed. And Dan was, very adamant post game that they're gonna get right back to work and they're gonna address it. And then Monday night, he said that conversation, that process, the steps to do that has already happened as well, which is encouraging. And I think probably the biggest news, or the bigger news from this regard, is Connolly stepped up and basically owned it all, which that's pretty impressive. We saw this with Bennett Williams last year when he got torched by UW, and then he immediately went out and spoke with us in the media and took ownership of it. And Connolly did very much the same. And you like to see that, especially, this is a very young player from an age and from a playing experience. And that was a pretty big, mature move to do.
Yeah. And we've heard about his maturity and his leadership and his work ethic, which I think are things that when you have the number one rated offensive line recruit in the country, you aren't necessarily anticipating are the other attributes. You're thinking about the physical stuff, but from everything we've heard, and again, it's limited exposure at this point, like he's kind of the complete package, and obviously needs to work on some of the pre-snap stuff. That was a problem. 3 false start penalties on Saturday. As he said, Oregon failed to score any points on any of those drives following his false starts. And he said it was, I think we asked, because Dan had said post game that it was some of that stemming, some of that cadence stuff, and stemming, for those unfamiliar, is the offensive line kind of shifting right before the snap. That can kind of throw off some of the, I should say, the defensive line moving before the snap, and that can throw off an offensive line. But Josh basically just said it was anxiety, nerves, that he was a little bit unprepared maybe for what he was getting into. And that really the turning point for him came in the second half when he realized how costly these mistakes had been for the team. And to the point I made earlier that, and he said as well, of like, when I'm jumping and getting our team off schedule on downs, we're not scoring any points on those drives, and I need to correct those. And you saw that happen, and he certainly settled in down the stretch and at least played mistake-free football. So yeah, I agree, Matt. Impressive to hear that from a guy who's still only in his second year of college football and only just made a second career start too.
Yeah, no, credit goes to Connerly for owning up to it. Based off of like our limited interactions with him in the past, and we weren't able to talk to him at all last year because he's a true freshman, which is a team rule. It's kind of been under Dan for the last 2 years. But when we talked to him in the spring, and I got the impression that it wasn't really surprising that he came out and owned up to it, because that's just kind of the type of guy he is. I remember we talked to him after the spring game, and he was, you asked the question like, oh, like what are you trying to improve upon as they go into the fall camp, and he was honest. He's like, I just need to get like a nasty streak, I believe is what he said, and he needs to be like a more physical and a nastier player at the line of attack. So for him to own up to it, I'm not surprised at all. I think the sky's the limit for him in terms of what he can be as a left tackle. Obviously costly penalties, but he performed well on Saturday. Just going back and watching the tape, he was one of Oregon's best offensive line. He and Ajani on the other side at right tackle were tremendous for most of the night. Not a whole lot from Taki Taimani, is who I interviewed today. Oregon obviously needs to work on quarterback runs. He said that they, just like Dan did at his Monday press conference, that's something that they're working on during practice every single day so far this week. I'm not sure how much it'll come up against Hawaii, but that's something that they need to improve upon. And he just said that they're sticking to the fundamentals, or sticking to the plan of what they were doing heading into the week against Texas Tech, and they just have faith in the plan and the system that Dan has implemented, that Tosh has implemented. It was a funny interview just because of Ben Roberts came in and asked Taki Taimani what his favorite food was, to which Taki replied about drinking coffee and chocolate milk. So not really a food item, so to say, yeah, but definitely a drink item. He tried to get a Starbucks NIL deal out of it. So maybe from his playing days at Washington and Seattle, he can get some pull and get some Starbucks memorabilia next time we see him. But it's just overall, like, Taki just confident in the defense. Really excited about the way that they kind of turned it around as well. Like talking about in the second half, that they stuck to the game plan. They needed to execute at a higher level. That he felt like he did that. There was some leadership that stood up. So good day all around from Taki.
Yeah, the leadership thing was brought up by people at Texas Tech after the game, and then I asked a couple of people about it as well Tuesday, and I think it was Tez, or maybe it was Josh, but it was the comment was basically, this is a player-run team, and if it's going to be truly a player-run team, the players have got to step up to it, and that's what happened at Texas Tech. It sounds like in that fourth quarter. The leadership brought, stepped up. That's what Bo was talking about post game. Was there was a lot of leadership on the sideline from both sides of the football, and to what your point, Jared, is the defense, the offense guys stepped up when they needed to. I don't think there's any new information beyond what we've just shared from Monday or Tuesday that we haven't covered. So, yeah. Let's turn the page now to Hawaii. An opponent that is going to test Oregon's secondary again quite a bit. Dan was very complimentary of the passing attack that the Rainbow Warriors will bring to Autzen Stadium. I think you Erik asked the question about the run and shoot. Timmy Chang, their head coach, legendary quarterback, and Dan seemed to be fired up about that and just this matchup that it presents for the Ducks.
It's kind of a unique thing where you're facing a team that's led by probably its most storied individual player. It would be like if like Marcus Mariota or LaMichael James had returned to Oregon and were coaching, and Chang hasn't had a ton of success, but as a coach, but as a player, he was really, really talented. And Dan kind of said that the team takes on that personality, at least stylistically. Like they throw the ball a lot. They are currently leading the nation in pass attempts by like 20. They've also played an additional game because Hawaii always plays a week 0 game. And to Matt's point, like I think there's some guys in Hawaii. There's like 2 or 3 players in offense that you go like these are like pretty quality players. Like the quarterback Braden Shager. I know I mentioned at the end of Saturday's podcast that he has a live arm, and Dan said that in terms of just the pure arm strength of throwing the ball down the field, and again small sample size, but so far this season, Shager is the quarterback who does have the strongest arm. Braden Shager, the junior quarterback, started a lot all last season, put up big numbers so far through 3 games this year, averaging about 300 yards passing, has thrown for 13 touchdowns in 3 games. And I think just objectively, like they played Stanford and Vanderbilt like tougher than maybe people want to acknowledge. They lost by I think 7 to Vanderbilt and 13 to Stanford. So competitive losses against probably 2 of the worst Power 5 football programs, but Power 5 talent nonetheless. And they beat Albany this past weekend. I don't have any scout on them, but they should have won that game, and they did. So do I think this is a team that's going to like really pose a bunch of problems? Probably not. But stylistically, I think again, like this is, another offense at least is going to present challenges and some kind of opportunity to work out some of the kinks in that secondary. 2 receivers have been really productive. Pofele Ashlock, who's a redshirt freshman, he's had over 300 yards receiving in 3 games. That's a guy Dan was pretty high on, and then Stephen McBride, who transferred from Kansas, who I think has like 210 yards in 3 games. So they throw the ball a lot. They've got a couple of guys they throw to a lot, and their quarterback has, as to Dan's point, will test you vertically. So that's kind of the gist of the offense. I think they're not going to run the ball hardly at all. I'd be shocked if it was more than like 8 designed running back runs.
Yeah,
I hope they do.
Gonna bring that up. Oh, they're I don't know, man. They're averaging 49 yards a game this year.
Well, the only reason I want them to run the football is because they have an offensive lineman that is both their backup center and their backup running back. So I really want to see this play out.
Yeah, he's a game wrecker. That guy. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I remember watching the week 0 matchup and seeing him in the goal line. Like it looks like Noah Sewell back there as a running back, and we've seen that at Oregon, but they run to it pretty often at Hawaii. But yeah, I mean their leading rusher this year has 76 yards. Like they're not going to run the ball in 3 games.
No.
Yeah, so they're a true run and shoot offense. Again, like Erik was kind of going through, it's a good test to see what Oregon's defense looks like against a passing attack. And last week against Tyler Shuck, and Texas Tech, they had ups and downs. Obviously, the 3 interceptions are big. One of them was at the end of the game, so 2 real interceptions. But they locked down at points against a good Texas Tech offense. Another kind of run and shoot air raid version. Like I mentioned earlier, they struggled against Shuck in the running department, but I don't anticipate there's going to be a lot of that with Hawaii other than scrambles, just because that's, kind of how an air raid will work at points. But it'll be a good test. This is a game where you'll see if like the additions of Tysheen Johnson and Evan Williams and Kyrie Jackson have really paid out the dividends that Oregon hopes that they do. And it'll be a fun one. I'm excited to see what Hawaii looks like. Like Erik said, like they gave Stanford a good test. Ultimately, Stanford just, like, I don't know, it's weird to watch Stanford this year because they're like a run and shoot air raid offense. So they just started moving the ball through the air down the field, and I was like, what is this? This is strange. But it's a defense that will give you some issues. They have 3 or 4 guys they have 4 guys that have over 3 tackles for loss this season. Like they get to the backfield, they're an aggressive defense, but nothing, if you're Oregon, that you're overly frightened about, to say the least. I mean, the spread on this game is 38 points in favor of Oregon for a reason. I don't think it'll be the 81-7 drubbing that Portland State was, but there's a little bit of like Hawaii could get going on offense just because Oregon's pass defense can't stop them. But I still feel Oregon is obviously the more talented team, but this would just be a second good matchup for them, especially heading into a Pac-12 season where there are a lot of offenses that run kind of like Hawaii's, where they're going to throw the ball 40 times a game, and you just have to get prepared for it.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a game that the expectation is by halftime it's not like in hand. The victory hasn't been secured, but you should be in total control of this game. And by the fourth quarter at some point, whether it's the start or maybe it's early in the fourth or midway through, you pull all your starters. That's the type of game I'm expecting, where we're, like you said, Jared, we're probably going to see the starters in here longer than we did week one against Portland State. But at some point in this game, they should get pulled, because the reality is, if Oregon's who we think they are, that this is a team that they should pummel and they should win. But at the same time, there should be some tests. There should be some opportunities where they face some stresses, and that's probably going to happen because their offense is pretty good.
Yeah, I'm trying to think here defensively. I'm looking through it here. One thing Dan did say is to the point that Jared made a lot of tackles for loss this season, and that's true. They've been pretty disruptive in that regard. Simulated pressures was a term that he used. I know Oregon fans who were familiar with Dan coming in from Georgia, that was like a big part of what he had done at Georgia, a lot of success, and still something he's doing quite a bit now, especially if you go back and watch the Tech game. You saw that a fair amount, but Hawaii will throw some of that at you. And what I was kind of surprised when I was looking through their team is just how like they're kind of undersized, especially up front.
They really are.
Their best pass rusher is like 6'1", 240. I'm going to give this a shot, but I guess pray for me. Jonah Kawahahi Welch. So the second part's the hyphenation. That part I got. The first part, no idea.
Yeah.
And then their top tackler from this year and last year, Logan Taylor, is like 6 foot 215. He used to play safety. Oregon, I guess, has a pretty good feel for those converted safety turned inside linebackers. But he finished last year on a tear. I was looking through this. He had more than 11 tackles in their last 6 games, each of the last 6 games last season. And he has 21 through 7 this year. So that's a guy who will be involved a fair amount, I would imagine. But Dan was complimentary about the talent on defense. I think coaches are always going to say that, but maybe it's a situation where they play really hard, they get the most out of them. But most of the players I was kind of looking at as kind of guys to mention in my know the foe 5 players were like, oh, those guys are pretty small for the position that they're playing.
Yeah, another thing that I picked up on Hawaii during just like preliminary research, since it's only Tuesday, like they're a pretty undisciplined team. So far this year, they have 29 penalties on offense and 23 penalties on defense. Against Stanford, they had 11 penalties on offense for 114 yards, and then 9 more on defense for 81 yards. Like, this is
20 penalties in a game is a lot. Oregon had 14. Yeah. That felt like a terrible number.
Well, they've done this in almost every game. Against Vanderbilt, they had 15, Stanford with 20, and then 17 against UAlbany. And it's to clarify here, it's University at Albany, just to let everybody know, because I had to figure that out because it was very strange. And so this is going to be. We thought that Oregon was really undisciplined against Tech, like you said, Eric. Like it's going to be interesting. I also picked up on the undersize of a lot of guys, and I think that directly correlates with how poor their offensive line is in terms of run blocking. Against Stanford, they had 16 rush attempts for, get this, -5 yards. So if you're Oregon's defensive line, you got to feel pretty good about your potential to get to the backfield in either the quarterback or the running back. Against Vanderbilt, it was 25 attempts for 40 yards. So that's 35 yards combined. And what is that? 41 rushing attempts against Power 5 opponents. They've done all of their 148 total yards in the season. 113 of them came against University at Albany. So this is an opportunity for Oregon's defense, at least rush game. Like, I don't really think you have to worry about that at all unless there's some scrambles and things like that. But this all goes back to the pass defense. And can they withstand just this air raid offense where they're just going to be taking shots all over the place? That's just, again, like I think this is going to be a repeating factor every week for us in this podcast. Is like, will the pass defense stand up against good quarterback X this week?
Yeah.
Well, and to Oregon's advantage here is Hawaii is the worst team in the country in protecting the quarterback. They've given up the most sacks
bad,
this season, 14 total. Now they've played an extra game than a good chunk of the season, so that does factor in here. But 14
and
total.
they pass it every down, so there's more opportunities to get there. But yeah, continue. Sorry,
but still 14 sacks, which could factor also in. Jared is correct that Hawaii does not run the football, but some of their rushing stats are probably skewed a little bit because they've been sacked 14 times, which will hurt.
It certainly doesn't help.
It certainly doesn't help. But like, I'm not trying to discredit you at all because you were right. Like,
No,
they don't run the football. They don't run the football. But if the easiest way to stop a passing attack is to get the quarterback on his back, and it feels like there's going to be an opportunity for a guy like Dorless, a guy like Mateo, Birch, Popo, whoever, is along with defensive line, Casey Rogers, to get here and make pressure and force, their quarterback, their offense to speed up and to make mistakes. Yeah, and that's the easiest way to stop a passing attack.
I was just going to say, to kind of sum up my thoughts on this one, towards the sack part especially, like we saw in the Portland State game with the quick game and how they play, how hard it was to get after the quarterback. We saw against Texas Tech where there were some longer, developing routes where the quarterback had to sit in there, how that impacted things. Hawaii is much closer to like that. They sit back there and they want to throw the ball downfield a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're going to take a lot of shots. Like Ashlock, the receiver I mentioned, I think he already has 2 catches over 50 yards and 2 more over 30. So they're throwing the ball down the field with pretty high frequency. Those type of plays lend towards sacks. If you're able to, hold up in coverage a little bit and get to the quarterback, which to the point is 3 teams before this have been pretty successful in doing that. Like this could be a game where that sack total again goes up and maybe you head into go into Colorado feeling like that's a strength of this defense as opposed to what we thought coming into the season might be a weakness.
Yeah, to go off the deep ball, that's like a 20% amount of their passes are thrown over 20 yards down the field. It's 18.8 actually. 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Average yards after the catch is like 15. So they certainly throw the ball pretty deep, almost 20% of the time that they drop back. And this gives an opportunity for Oregon's defensive line to stack up sacks this week specifically. We'll see who it is that gets the sacks, but I would imagine that there's some more, even over Texas Tech sack total of 4. Like I think they'll hit that pretty easily.
You mentioned 20 yards or more. They've completed 14 of those passes, which is 5th in the country, and then they've also completed 8 of 30 or more in this so far through 3 weeks, which is 4th in the country. Now, granted, again, they've played a 3rd extra game than everybody else. That factors in here. But to your guys' points, they sling it, and they certainly hold on to the ball to let them take shots. That was something that Jalil Florence, that was one of the first things that he said was they take a lot of shots, and it's going to be important for this team to be ready for that because Ashlock and a couple other guys on this team are talented enough to make the plays. Dan said that they've got talent at receiver. It's gonna be a good test. Good test.
I like their quarterback. He's a true gunslinger. He's already has 5 picks in 3 games. Interestingly, I think 3 of those came against UAlbany, which is like kind of weird. Like that was his worst game so far. But like I said, he has a strong arm and he is not afraid to he's from Texas. He's a true Texas gunslinger. He will throw the ball down the field. And I wouldn't be stunned if at one point during Saturday's game, I guess if don't come away too doom and gloom if it's like they connect on a 50-yard touchdown pass. That is their bread and butter. They are going to try to do it all afternoon. And I think honestly, it'll be really impressive if you come out of that game and they don't connect on at least 1 or 2 long passes, because that's to the point. 20% of their attempts They throw the ball almost 50
Yep.
times a game. That means you're looking at a lot of passes down the field. So they expect to see that be a staple on Saturday of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, Ashlock has 27 total receptions. 6 of them are deep shots. He's caught, or 5 of them are deep shots. He's been targeted 6 times. Like, this is what they do. McBride is another guy, 8 targets, 3 receptions out of 25 or deep balls, so over 20 yards. Like, to Eric's point, like if Oregon comes away and there's no 40 to 50 to 60-yard touchdown, I would be pretty surprised just because of how often they do it. Like, you know, it's kind of like, it's just odds. Like, eventually one of these will land, but I think Oregon will be playing a lot of Brian Addison. That's what I would expect. A lot of him, whoever's like your fastest safety, just to provide over the top help. Just they're gonna throw it. If he throws 40 times, it's gonna be like, you know, 10 of them are gonna go down the field over 20 yards.
All right. I think that's going to do it for us here on this Autzen Audibles Podcast Tuesday edition. We'll be bringing on Jackson Moore of 24/7 Sports. He covers the Hawaii Rainbows to come on the show, preview Hawaii, get you more familiar with Oregon's opponent on Saturday, and then we'll make our game picks and more predictions and a full preview of the game on Thursday. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.